We have the pleasure of being joined by Tiffany Allen, CEO of Boss on a Budget. Tiffany Allen is the CEO, and the Boss on a Budget is a small firm that teaches communities to form strong nonprofits and obtain funding. Her passion is working with Black led nonprofits and other new and community led nonprofits, teaching them to use their skills and talents to get funding. She manages an online network of over 14,000 people from across the world who are seeking grant writing assistance and support, and teaching nonprofit startups to a combined audience of over 20,000 followers on YouTube and Instagram. She regularly produces video and written content on nonprofit startup and fundraising. So we have a wealth of knowledge coming to us this afternoon, and it should be a delight. And with that, Tiffany, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm happy to join everyone today. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to hope that it works the right way. So if you all can see me, just give me a thumbs up and just let me know it's okay. All right, we're in business. So I'm excited to do this presentation today. This is actually kind of a part two and an extension of a presentation that I completed last January with Bonterra, and it was also related to using your data to make the case for funding. So in that presentation, I talked a lot about how to identify the right data, how to define success for your organization, and I mentioned a three-step model. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is dive deeper into that model that I shared in that first presentation. And if you want more details about how to identify the right data, how to create your outcomes and things like that, that part one is the better resource for that, if that makes sense. But I want to talk to you a little bit about myself. I teach people how to start nonprofits and raise money from the ground up. And I just shared with Ashley, I've been doing this since 2016. So it's been about 10 years. And I typically teach from the perspective of the small nonprofit or new nonprofit. And in my world, small means a 50,000 budget, a $250,000 budget. So I really mean small, but I believe this information can help any nonprofit. And I've grown. I have now over 45,000 people on my YouTube channel. So if you need assistance with running your nonprofit or raising money, you can find me on YouTube. All the information is there. And I also have a private community of founders where I provide accountability related to fundraising. But let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about what we're going to cover today. I like to keep things simple and I like to keep things action-based. So what we're going to do today is talk about and do three main things. First, we're going to talk to you about how to prepare yourself to make the case for funding. And then we're going to talk about making the case using your data, using the model that I mentioned before. And at the end, we're going to have time for questions. Isn't that fun? All right. So just a quick note, this webinar is based on the assumption that you do have some data and you just need help figuring out what to do with it. All right. And that's the place where we're starting from. But what I'd like to ask you first is, what are your challenges with using your data when you are fundraising? I want to hear from your perspective. Where are you stuck, or where do you often encounter obstacles or barriers? And I should have warned you that I'm very interactive. I'm going to ask you to talk to me in the chat. I need you to chat back. I need to hear from you because I want to make sure that you get what you need from this presentation. And I can't do that if I don't hear from you. So as I wait for you all to talk to me about your challenges, I also didn't mention that I was a principal investigator in research for several years. I worked for a national nonprofit called Child Trends. So it's interesting that I come from this perspective, from the research and data perspective. I talked a lot in that position about how to define outcomes, how to do program evaluation. So I bring all of that experience to you to help you make sense of your data. All right. So Jill says, I'm not going to get that word right, but I know what you mean, Jill. Rurality and data, systems for collecting data easily, using it effectively to tell a story rather than just coming at folks with a bunch of numbers. Right. I like this one. So Sarita's saying the data that I have to collect for current funders or grants doesn't always translate to donors well. All right. This is great stuff. But let me talk to you a little bit about what I hear. And it's similar to some of what you guys have talked about. People will often say to me, well, we don't know how to tell our story, right? We don't know how to share who we are and share our true selves to our donors or our funders. Or some people will say, I'm not comfortable with data, or you guys mentioned your staff aren't comfortable with data. So you don't have systems in place to really look at your data, have clean data, and use it effectively. I've also heard people say, well, we have it, but we don't know what to do with it. We're doing the right thing, right, Tiffany? We are collecting the information that we're supposed to be collecting, but then we just have stuff. We just have information and we're not sure where to go from there. And I heard this from someone. I heard you say, well, funders and donors just don't understand what we do. And kind of the flip of that, I heard someone say or read someone say, we collect the data for them, but it just doesn't share who we are, right? And I stopped reading the chat so I can get back to my slides, but I can sense, I'm just going to say that I can sense that some people are worried about the current environment that we're in right now. And we know that federal government funding is at risk for a lot of nonprofits or has already been taken away. So I know there's some angst about, well, there's even less funding available now. There's even more competition now. So how do we stand out? How can we use our data to show that we need funding, right? When there are so many other organizations who are also going to be competing for that funding. So, what we're going to talk about today is kind of how to answer these questions and how to position yourself using the data that you have. All right. Anytime that I do a presentation, I always like to start with what you believe, right? I always like to start with what we assume or what we know about data because I often find that people have limiting beliefs or people have some blocks around this work, especially when it comes to asking for money, especially when it comes to making the case for your organization. And the reality is, it's your beliefs that are either going to propel you forward or hold you back. And so there are just some things we really have to be on the same page about to fully appreciate and digest this training. The first thing I want us to agree on, and let me know if you're with me on this, is that data, and I'm using that in a plural way, they are your superpower. They reveal what's special and unique about your organization. And sometimes we feel like we're in a box, right? We feel like, well, we have to collect information a certain way, like someone said, but you can use data to show people who you are and to tell the story of your organization. You can use that. You can use it in a powerful way. The other thing I want to share is that data really help the world really see and understand what you do. You are not limited by what you collect. You are not limited by what you are required to share. And we're also going to talk about how we often think in numbers and we think that's the only part of our story when we have so much more available to us to show the world who we are and what we do. Okay. You control, and I say this in every training, you control how to tell your organization's story. You have the information, but it's your job to message that in the way that makes sense for the people who need to hear from you, whether it's your donors or your funders or whoever it is. You control what you know about your organization, and you have to create that message, right? And then finally, I just have to throw this in here for you to understand that size does not dictate impact. And I don't know how many of you all here are with smaller nonprofits, but sometimes when I talk to those folks, they feel like, well, we haven't done enough or we're not doing enough. We're not helping thousands of people. We're helping tens of people. We're helping hundreds of people. But size does not dictate impact. You make a change, whether you're making a change for one person or you're making a change for 1,000 people. There's still a change. And there's still an opportunity for you to share how you made that change, for you to lift up and amplify the goodness of the change that you created. So if there's anything that resonated with you, please put that in the chat because I really want you to start from a place of embracing data, not from a place of limiting ourselves, but understanding that data give us a really unique opportunity to be able to tell our story in really powerful ways. So I want to start with the first part of this training, and we need to get clear on three things we have to understand first before we ever try to make the case for funding for your nonprofit. So if you're with me, can you put three things in the chat for me so I know that you're here and I know you're not sleeping on me. I know you're not going to sleep on me. All right. Thank you for those who are with me. So here's the first thing we have to understand. We have to understand that the way we think about data, we can expand that. We have to think about it broadly, right? So let's start from the beginning. What are data? If we take the simplest explanation or the simplest definition, they are facts or they're information that we collect for reference or analysis. That's as basic as I could make the definition, right? And we also understand that data, sometimes we assume that it's just numbers. When we hear that word, we automatically go to the numbers, right? But data are just actually information. So if you take a step back and you look at it more broadly, we understand that we can use it in multiple ways, or we can use multiple things to make our case, not just numbers. So when you're thinking about this training, think about your quantitative data, your numeric data, and then the qualitative data, the narrative-based data, right, that you collect around the work that you do, or the potential to be able to collect not just quantitative data, but qualitative data in the work that you do. I also want you to think broadly and get out of the mind that data only come from your clients or your participants, right? So when we think about data, we think about, okay, our program outcomes and how did our program show change? But your clients are a great source, absolutely. But think broadly about your board. Your board has information to share. Your volunteers have information, your staff, and also your donors and your funders can provide information for you and provide data for that share the story of your organization as well. And this is going to make more sense as we go along because you're probably like, well, what can a board member tell me about our program outcomes, or how in the world is that going to help me? And hopefully, as you listen during this training, it makes more sense and it clicks for you. Because when it comes to fundraising, you can think big and broadly about how you communicate your impact. It's not just the numbers. And I know, like, when it comes to grant proposals, we have to show our data, like, we have to show our outcomes, we have to show that we're measuring that kind of thing. But it's also important to think about how fundraising isn't just about the numbers. It's about gaining trust. It's about emotion, right? It's about stories that pull people to your mission. So that's why I'm starting out talking about data broadly, because the numbers aren't enough, right? And they are great. Trust me, they're great, but they're not enough. So here's the second thing I want you to understand. Can you put your value in the chat? Understand your value. What do I mean by that? Every one of your organizations brings something to the table. You all have something that you do well or that makes you who you are, right? And it's really important for you to own that, to embrace it, and to talk about it constantly. So I want you to think about, before you even decide to make the case, what is your secret sauce? What is the thing you do better than other organizations? And in the last presentation, I talked about what do you do? What have you done first or best or only? I got that from a grant writer. That's not mine. But I loved how he described it, right? You can be first, best, or only at something. And that's one way you can stand out. That's one way you can show the value you bring to your community, the value you bring to the people you serve. It's important to do constant inventories about who you are and what makes you different. One thing you can do is find out what people are saying about you. What are the comments you get consistently about your work? And what people say about you and repeat back to you is a clue into what you can amplify to make a case for your funding. And also, I want you to think about your processes, the way you do your work, the models you use, the frameworks. What is it about what you do that's different from other people, which absolutely contributes to the outcomes that you have for your organization? So you also want to think about, okay, what are those things and how we do it that help us be successful? Okay. So we got that. And I see the chat going off and I love it. And we're absolutely going to have time for questions and things like that. The third thing I need you to understand is your audience. If you're with me, put audience in the chat. Before you can make an appeal to anyone or anything, you have to know what appeals to them. See what I did there? I played on words. So you have to understand the audience you want to attract first. And that audience may shift based on where you get your funding, right? But whoever you're targeting, you have to understand, well, what is the typical profile of who you're targeting? If it's foundations, what's the typical profile of the foundations that you're going after? Who do they typically fund? What's their messaging like? What do they care about? And there are clues to what they care about because you see what they fund in the past. You see the amounts of things that they funded in the past from their 990 forms, right? What are the things that they pay attention to? What are the things that agitate them? What fires them up? What gets them to stand up and take action? And this could be with organizations or it could be with people, right? Also understand like what's going on in their sphere, in their world. What information are they taking in? You may assume that they understand something or perceive something a certain way or the way that you do, and that's just not the case. People experience the world and take in information differently than us. It's hard to get that, but it's true. So you got to understand what is their world? What are the things that they're taking in, they're consuming, and what are they talking about? And to understand that, you have to actually talk to them. You have to actually learn them. You have to study them. So, my question is, how often do you reach out to a donor or a funder outside the context of an ask? Are you making a point to talk to and hear from and learn from a donor or a funder? And it's not about getting money in that moment in time. That's something you should ask and consider, right? Because you want to understand what about your organization appeals to them. And you're not going to get that unless you actually talk to them. Okay. So I want to pull this together because I don't like to present and then just not give you concrete things that you can walk away with. And I'm also very conscious that people are stretched, people have limited time, have limited staff. So I'm hoping that some of these practical tips can help move you forward in the right direction. So one thing I want you to think about is making it a regular practice to learn from your donors and learn from your funders. It should not be the exception. It should be a regular part of the work that you do. So if you're in a meeting with a funder, ask them to describe your work, right? Ask them, or if you're meeting with a donor, how would you describe the work we do? Or how would you describe the impact that we make? Or why do you think our work is so important? And I really do think you'll be surprised and blown away by how they describe your work. And I absolutely recommend that you take their words and use that to make the case when you're approaching other funders or back to that same funder or donor. If you have a meeting with a funder, always have a list of at least 3 questions that you're going to ask that funder. I know that the purpose of it may be to get more information about the proposal or to provide updates, but have a running list of questions that you're going to always ask to be able to understand where they are in that moment. Okay. Another thing you can think about is collect stories. Regularly collect stories. Every training, and I'm pretty sure you've heard this from other folks, stories are really important in your fundraising. Put time into your everyday work to hear from people. Schedule 15-minute interviews with board members or with people who have donated and ask why they gave. Ask what's important to them right now. Ask what their world is about, right? If you can't do this individually, do a group session. Have a Zoom session where you are offering to share updates about your organization. And in your icebreaker, you can be sneaky about it. In your icebreaker, you can ask people to say, well, why is our mission so important to you? Or what does it mean to have the services that we provide, right? Have them put it in the chat. And then the things that they say, screenshot it, save that information, and use that information. Make it easy on yourself, right? Put in automations to follow up with a survey after programs are completed, right? If people complete a service at the 6 month mark or they attend a training or whatever, have an automation to follow up with an email or a text so that they can complete or answer a few questions about the work and why it was so important. And I also encourage you to have like a yearly assessment process where you are assessing your organization's strengths and weak spots from multiple people, not just from the leadership perspective. And I'm not talking about a drawn out strategic planning process because people don't have money for that all the time or every year, but you have to make time to do that assessment to understand where you are, how have you grown, what are your strengths, and what are the areas you need to pay more attention to. And it'll help you refine the messaging that you have when you're making the case for funding. All right, so we did part one, right? I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page about there's certain things that you have to do and understand before you even try to make a case for funding. Now, obviously, you have to have the data in place and that you have to have the information in order to do that. And again, this presentation is more so about what to do when you have the data. And that first session will really give you tips and tools for how to collect data and what to think about and what data to collect. But now I want to turn to how do you make the case, right? What do you do? And I'm going to talk about it using the method that I mentioned before, which is the SAP method. And it stands for success, authority, and perspective. We're going to talk more about it, but I want you to get those three words: success, authority, and perspective. If y'all are ready for part two, please put part two in the chat. Let me know you're still here. It helps me so much when you chat back with me. Got it, got it, got it. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's start with the first one, success. You have to toot your own horn. And I'm very big on triggers and things that help remind you to do things. But just remember this sound, toot toot. When you're thinking about, oh, we're going to do too much. Should we share this information? Should we always be talking about our organization? Yes. You have to toot your horn. Toot, toot. You have to hone in on the things that make you better than other organizations, that make you stand out. And this is not about downplaying other organizations, but do you want to stand out? Do you want people to pay attention to you? Then you have to embrace the fact that it's okay and it's important to share why you should exist in your community and why you should exist in your industry. So, one of the things you can do is to share your positive outcomes. So, if you do have data, share it, right? Share what has changed for your participants. And an outcome can be different things. It could be a change in an attitude, it could be changes in beliefs, a change in someone's knowledge or their skills. It could be a change in their perspective or their action, right? So those are really concentrated on like what are the outcomes, what are the program outcomes, what are the successes that we have as a result of the work that we have done with our programming. But I encourage you to make your messaging concrete. Don't just talk about what you did and the amount of work you did, but I want you to get comfortable to talk about what changed, what moved in when you talk about your numbers, right? So let's flip this. Instead of saying we provided financial counseling for 50 clients this year, which is really important, right? But we have to talk about why that matters because everyone may not get why that's so important. You have to think about what's at stake and communicate what's at stake when you share your numbers. So instead of saying, oh, we provided counseling for 50 clients, you can say 95% of our clients have a home after 6 months in our financial counseling program. Because what matters the most to your mission and to the work that you do is how it impacted somebody. It's really important to show your effort and it's really important to show the scope and the scale of your work. We're not going to forsake that. But in the end, you have to get to the meat of what matters when you're communicating your data. And what matters the most is that when someone gets financial counseling, when someone has the training that they didn't get in school, right? The training that aren't typically provided for certain communities, then it makes a real change in their wealth, in their home life, right? It makes a change. And so you have to be able to communicate that in your numbers. I want you to talk less about your activities and more about the benefit that results or the change that results because of your activities. Hope that makes sense. Here's one thing that some people are probably gonna be like, huh, I never thought about this, but I encourage you to think in this way when you're talking about your success and when you're tooting your own horn. Somebody say toot toot. So as I shared before, your perceived credibility and trust motivate people. Stories and what people hear about you and know about you actually are motivators. When you feel things are still premature and you don't have proof for a lot of things, because for a lot of people, they don't have strong data yet. They can't prove per se. It's not much we can prove, but there's not a lot you can say, well, we created this or we helped this thing succeed. But even when you don't have like a proof of concept yet, you can still show that you're credible by getting other people or other organizations to vouch for you. You can still talk about and build your credibility where people trust you, even if you haven't done much yet in your eyes, right? So ask yourself, have other funders supported you? Can they vouch for you? Can they talk about your work? And can you show other funders that these people took a chance on us, right? Are there important community members or trusted organizations that have supported you? So, one way to get people to support you is to get the people they trust to share information about you, right? Can they create introductions for you for your organization? I want you to think about what achievements you've completed. Maybe you have a certain designation in your field, or you've gotten an award, or you've made some incredible movement. Maybe you have a space, right? And that shows momentum, and people see that's positive movement, and people begin to believe that, oh, somebody is supporting that. I want to learn more about that organization, right? I also want you to think about what partnerships do you have? Because when people see that you partner up with other organizations, they have a sense that, oh, they must be doing something. If they're working together or if they're working with that organization, then serious, right? And I just want to share a quick story for those who are concerned if you feel like you don't have enough data yet or if you don't have proof of your work. I worked with an organization that got started in 2020, and they needed to raise $100,000 to start their organization to do the work. And they are providing high level coaching for people who typically didn't have access to that coaching, people of color, right? And it is called Coaching for Everyone. That's the name of the nonprofit. Well, we raised $117,000 without providing one lick of coaching yet, right? And the way we did that is we made the case for why coaching was needed for this community. And we talked to people who felt like coaching was really important to them. And we got them to speak on the organization's behalf to talk about what it would mean for that service to be available where it hasn't been provided before. And people haven't paid attention to that before. And they got their communities and their networks to give and to support, right? So I know some people are like, we don't have data, we don't have information that we need to be able to raise the funding. You can do that by sharing the hope or the expectation of the work and using people who have trust with other folks who can support. I hope that makes sense. So here are some practical tips for showing your success. You can start incorporating these today. I want you to find or pull out the most relevant or compelling win about your organization that you can share. Because there might be a lot of stuff you've done and a lot of data you have. I want you to find one or two really relevant or important data points. And I want you to talk about that thing and mention it everywhere you go. I want you to use it over and over and over again. I want you to get good at sharing and messaging those particular wins. So when you introduce your organization, I don't want you to just talk about your mission. That's great. But then I want you to follow up with one of those data wins or those data points because you're talking about what you have accomplished, right? In the work when you're introducing your organization. I also want you to think about how to incorporate that into your marketing. You should have some data on your homepage. Make those wins very prominent in your social media bios, right? 90% of our clients get their first home in 6 months, right? That could be in a social media bio. That could be when you talk about your mission. I want you to put it in your About Us pages where you can describe who you are. Describe who you are with your data, right? With the work that you've done. When you use wins in conversations with staff and volunteers, and you're always talking about it, hey, we're the organization that gets people homes in 6 months. Then people get excited about that and they see and can connect with that impact and they can co-opt that language too and use it in their interactions with people. And I also want you to get comfortable with using visualizations to complement your data. That is one great way to show success because most people are visual. They take things in well visually, right? So especially if you want to show change or you want to show growth, use a graphic, use a chart, use an infographic to share that information and put that on social media and in your marketing and things like that, right? And if you're not creative and you can't figure out what visualization to show, use AI, use ChatGPT and ask it, hey, I need an idea to show this impact visually. And it will give you ideas for how you can create and share that impact and growth. All right. Step 2, share your authority. Somebody put authority in the chat. I know that was a lot of meat I just got through. I hope y'all are still with me. We'll share your authority. So here's the thing. Especially if you are a newer nonprofit or you're relatively unknown or you're a small nonprofit, the reality is you have to stand out. And though it takes a lot of time for you to build your visibility and to learn how to stand out and for people to recognize you, it is a long game, but that is the smart way to get funding and to gain trust in your community. And one of the great ways to stand out and to be visible is to establish yourself as the go-to or the authority on a topic. So you may be wondering, okay, Tiffany, an authority on what, right? This is what I need you to understand. Your organization is the authority on a topic because you are entrenched in the work. You are the expert at what you do because guess what? You're living and breathing it every single day. And you may not think that what you do is monumental or special, but there are other people who have no clue about what your work is like and what you encounter every day. No clue. So you have to see yourselves as an expert in the work that you do, in the type of services you provide, or in the way you provide your services. And your role is to educate people on what you know and understand about your work. So being an authority requires you to pick a platform, pick a topic, whatever that topic is. And everywhere you go, you're talking about that, right? Consistently. So you can be the source of information on a topic. If people need to know more about the work that you do, you can be a source of information so they can learn and learn more about your topic, basically. You can also be a convener, right? So when people see that you're already always gathering people, holding meetings, holding convenings about a topic, then they automatically assume that you know what you're talking about because you know all the people who are in this industry or whatever, and they begin to associate you with an expert and come to you, and you're building trust, and money comes through trust, okay? Share opinions on what's happening in the world and how it impacts your work. Have an opinion. Talk about it and how it impacts the work that you do every day. That's how you stand out. Because here's the thing, people want to believe that you have the answer. And when you talk about an issue a lot, they just automatically assume that you have some answers. So they come to you when they have questions, they refer people to you, they think about opportunities for you. And I'm talking about this from a very real experience. And when people trust, they give to you. When they believe you know what you're doing, they are comfortable sharing their resources with you. So talk about the work you do, educate people. Your expertise is your edge. So I want you to think about what areas of expertise you want to be diligent about sharing and educating people about. What's the thing you want your organization to be known for? What are you going to be the expert in? So here's some prompts, right? Um, what's something you know about that interests people that people always ask questions about, like the aspects of your work? They always are curious about the things that you do. What's a little known fact that you can talk about with your work that a lot of people don't realize or understand about what you do? Or maybe there's something that people are consistently surprised about to know about with the work that you do, right? What's one thing that people always get wrong about what you do? Okay. So there are so many ways to look at it and to think about it, but you have a sense of expertise that people need to know more about. Okay. And just a reminder that I don't know how many of you are aware of the fundraising cycle, but when you are fundraising, it's a process that you're taking people through. And before you ask, you have to educate. Before you ask, you have to inform, you have to engage, right? You have to tell people why it's important to do the work that you do. You have to persuade them to care. And people don't support what they don't understand. So they need you. People actually need your knowledge and expertise. So nail down what that is and be the source in your community and industry. I'm going to share a quick example. So in my past job, I was a national consultant for a lot of foundations. And my background is child welfare, child abuse and neglect. And oftentimes the foundations wanted to go in a certain direction and they wanted to know more about a topic, and they would ask consultants like me and people who worked at my company, well, who do you know that talks about this? Who do you know is sharing information about this? Because that was the gateway for them to be funded. If a foundation is asking about what someone is doing or what someone is sharing on a topic, it's because they're interested in it. And so we would introduce them to the people who were loud, who the people who looked like they knew what they were talking about, right? Because we trusted that. If you're sharing a lot, you clearly know something. And so again, trust is the gateway for getting money. I hope that helps. So let me give you some practical tips. Develop a 101 document or a resource that's educating people on a topic or on a series of topics, however you want to do it, right? What you can do is share it on your social media pages. Share it as a download that people can get in order to join your email list. Use it as the basis of a webinar to get people interested in your mission. When you go to a meeting or when you go to a conference, pass it around, right? Have printouts or get fancy, get a QR code and say, hey, I have this resource that would be really helpful for you. Scan this QR code and you can get the electronic version right now, right? Another thing you can think about is when your staff go out, have them participate in different boards or committees. Talk about the angle, like talk to your staff about this is how we're going to approach. We're going to always be seen as the organization that talks about this or provides input in this topic, right? So everywhere you're showing up and your organization is mentioned, it's around the topic or educating people about something, okay? And then I want you to find opportunities to comment on trending news or trending topics that impact your mission. And you can use free platforms like Threads, which is trying to be the new Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, medium.com, blogs to share your thoughts and your comments so that people begin to see you as an authority. And don't forsake your email marketing. Share what you know, share what you're learning from the work that you're doing in your email messaging and in your newsletters. All right. Step 3 is perspective. It's the last part of the model. We're almost done, y'all. And we can stop for questions in case people have had questions along the way. Can you put perspective in the chat? I had to stop and get some water real quick. Okay. One way you can make a strong case is to share a perspective that your funders or your donors are not aware of or they don't have access to. Most people have no idea what life is like for who you serve or what you serve because you may be not working with people, you may be working with animals or something else. But a lot of times people don't know life from their very intimate perspective. They just don't because they may not encounter it on a regular basis. There's no reason for them to do that, right? And they may not be in the same circles, right? And often in your work, I'm sure you can think about a population that's unnoticed or an experience that your target population has that people often overlook or take for granted, right? Do people really understand what it's like when you don't have enough money to feed your children? Do people really understand what it's like when you go to school and that's the only meal you have that day as a child, right? I think people, you may assume that they know, but they don't really know, right? So the way you share that perspective is through storytelling. And you need to let people tell their stories, share their perspectives about what it's like to experience, first of all, life as they know it, but what it's also like to experience your program. And they need to talk about without your program, what would life be like? Right? Life is like this. And if I didn't have this program, it would be like this. That's lifting up that sense of urgency. And I need you to use their words, right? Use their words, use their perspective, shine a light on something that people don't normally have access to. And I encourage you not to just use your client stories, but use your donors, use your board members, use your staff, and get them to tell their stories. Donors have powerful stories too. Maybe through the experience of learning more about what you do because they volunteered with your work, they can convince someone else why it's a good reason to support this project that you have. They can be your ambassadors as well, right? Sharing the human perspective adds color and it adds life to your numbers. And we have to remember that people connect to people. So when you're making a case for funding, you're connecting to people. People are reading your proposals, they're reading your messages, they're consuming your content, right? So you have to appeal to that. And numbers are effective, but stories and perspectives matter too. And I'm going to share one example. There is a young man, he has a nonprofit called Empowering Cuts. Empowering Cuts. He's in Philadelphia. He's on Instagram and he provides haircuts for people who are dealing with substance abuse, right? Who are dealing with addiction issues. And he will share the perspective of before and after the cut. But in these videos that he's producing, he's showing the human elements and who these people are and how they got to the position they're in. And he's sharing their hopes and their dreams. And he follows up with some of the people because he's always out in the streets. He goes to the streets in the bad areas and cuts people's hair. He has a mobile salon. And it's powerful to share someone who's in addiction and to share that there are people too. And we often don't see that. We often gloss over, oh, they're an addict, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. But you see the human side of the work and why it's so important that he meets them there and why it's so important that he's out there doing the work that he does. And when he sets that as the foundation, that storytelling, that real perspective, when it's time to ask for funding to continue to do his work, it's not as hard to sell because you've seen it in real time. You've seen the real stories. And so that's why it's so important to think about how you can use your information, all the data you have, your numbers and your stories to make a full, robust case for why you are needed right here and right now. So here are some practical tips. Every time you speak, every time you go somewhere or it's time to share, have a story in mind that you want to use to communicate your point. And it's great if you have like a story bank. You have like 3 or 4 stories that you're going to always mention, that you're going to always share when you're making certain points about your organization. I want you to also think about using surveys, interviews, focus groups, because you want to regularly collect perspectives from people, right? Especially the interviews and the focus groups, because people are so eloquent when they talk. People have a way of saying things and describing things that no grant writer or journalist could do on their own, right? Sometimes when it's using the words and hearing from the people directly gives you what you need to be able to communicate better why your work is so important. Okay. And what I want you to do is make asking for people's perspectives a part of your work. It's just a part of your program. We do this as a part of our services, and at the end of every service, we always send a survey. That's just part of your work. Write it into your budgets. Make that a part of your expenses to regularly collect information and data. And yes, you should be doing this with your quantitative data and collecting your demographic information and your baseline data. That should be baked into, but also bake in asking for people's opinions and perspectives and feedback. Put a story in your email campaign next week or your next email campaign. If it's all updates, put a story in there. Your next social media post, put out a story or share some information or share a different perspective from a real point of view, from a human perspective. Give other people a platform. So even if it's you not sharing it, have someone write a story. Have someone share what their experience was like or interview them and then write that down and use that in your marketing. Okay. I know I shared a lot of information. I tend to do that, sorry. But I want to make it as practical as possible and give you examples from multiple perspectives to figure out what can stick for you, what can work for you. And I challenge you to take just one idea from today's webinar that you can start incorporating this week to be able to make a stronger case or feel more confident about asking for funding and standing out when you're making a case for funding. Okay. So if you have an idea of what you want to take away from the webinar, drop it in the chat. You may encourage someone else or inspire someone else to do that as well. And I'm going to stop here and see if we have any questions.
Awesome, Tiffany. Thank you so much for this presentation. This was such a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure folks are leaving with so much information that they can then take back to their nonprofit and their organization. But folks, before we get into the kind of Q&A portion of everything, I want to go ahead and launch a quick poll here to see if you all are interested in learning more about some of Bonterra's tools and services and how we can help you all ultimately collect that data and therefore share your data story and hopefully get more funding with that data. Awesome. And while folks are filling that out, Tiffany, I did see a question earlier. I'm going to go and find it. Yes, here it is. The question comes from Lily. Lily asked, how do you deal with the situation that maybe, let's say you did have 500 people participate in your program, but when you're measuring kind of that long-term outcome and attempting to reach out to them, 6, 7, 8 months later, they're not really responding. Like, how do you kind of navigate that situation?
Well, one thing you can do is build the expectation when they finish the last interaction with you that you're going to be following up with them. And so let them know and expect to hear from you. And, there's just that's just how it works with collecting data. You're not going to get a response rate. Your response rate might be low, but build that expectation when you're first talking with them and check in with them if you can. I have found the most effective way to check in with people is text because people will always have their phone on them, most people, and they'll respond to a text. So if there's a way you can build that into your processes to say, hey, just checking on you, see how you're doing, to remind people. And constant reminders has been effective for me. Like people have to be constantly reminded to fill something out. And also, this is time intensive, but if you have a staff person who can follow up and at least get that information by doing follow-up calls, if people will answer, that may be effective as well. But it is going to be hard once time goes by to get people to follow up. But you could also provide an incentive, a gift card, or um, some kind of reward that may help as well.
Awesome. Good point. I definitely can see the value in setting that expectation early on, that, hey, you'll be hearing from us in 3 months or 6 months or whatever the case may be, just so that folks are ready. And also, good point about the texts. Lots of
Yeah.
people respond to their texts. I know I do. So, great tip there. Um, I'm not seeing many more questions. Oh, just kidding. We got one here. um, Oh, this is a good question from Cheryl. Cheryl asked about how many times you attempt to follow up before you are perceived as maybe a pain.
I would say three.
Right.
Three times.
Very
Try
good.
3 times and go from
Right.
there.
Awesome. Um, yeah, I'm not seeing many more questions, but what I will say, Tiffany, is I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat. Lots of people mentioning that this was a great presentation and that they want to share it with their colleagues. So, thank you for your time here, Tiffany, and you speaking to our audience. And I know that they appreciate it, and we appreciate it as well. And for folks on the line, if you just missed it in the beginning, we did record today's session, so we will be sending that out to you sometime next week. So be on the lookout for an email from us with the recording of the session, so that you can share it with your colleagues and rewatch it if necessary. And folks on the line, I want to thank you for your engagement in the chat with Tiffany. That always makes for a great presentation and a great time. And thank you for your time this afternoon and spending an hour with us. And we hope to see you at our next session. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your morning or afternoon. And again, we'll see you at our next session.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.